Hello, I'm Dan Gibson, and in this video series we are examining the question, how did the early Muslims calculate the Qibla direction of their mosques? This is the second video in this series. In the first video, we introduced the topic and we looked at some of the challenges we will face and what resources are available to us. Then we looked at how the builders of a mosque would calculate the four cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. These would be laid out on the ground. Now, in this video, it will be a little shorter, but it contains a lot of information and some important concepts we need to grasp. Once our architect has established the four cardinal directions drawn out on the ground, the next challenge is to fill in the other coordinates to the chart. In Arabic, these coordinates are known as akhnam, or the directions, the different directions on our chart. Now today, everyone divides a circle into 360 degrees. But if you read the ancient Arab manuscripts, you will discover that they only had 224 degrees in their circle. This works very nicely as they divided the circle into 32 divisions. Now, how would our architect do this? First, he would measure out from the post in the ground the equal distances on two of the lines that were already drawn. Most likely he would use rods preset for making measurements. Rods do not stretch and they can easily be placed against the wooden post in the middle of his circle. Now after measuring out equal distances, shown here with red arrows, he would put in small posts and then use a string and he would draw two circles. This would show him where the two circles intersected, and he could add then the middle line where the two circles intersected. Now this system can be duplicated again and again to find the next center line between the two measurements. If our architect repeated the process, he could create the full pattern if he needed the full pattern, or he could just work his way until he gets the line that he needs. In the end, he would have a circle with 32 lines. These are known as room lines in Arabic, which display the 32 directions. Every young Arab caravaneer or the caravan worker knew about the circle and dividing it into 32 parts, and each of these 32 directions had individual names. Now notice in the illustration that the 32 directions could be broken down even farther, and smaller points called zams were in between the 32. So 7 zams made an akhnam and 32 akhnams made a circle. This is sometimes referred to as a compass rose or a windrose. Incidentally, this is how we can tell an Arab chart from a European one. The Arabs used 32 points, each with 7 zams, which made 224 degrees in the circle. The Europeans like to use 360 degrees. Now this created difficulties when transposing maps made from one area to another. During the Middle Ages, some European map makers just used the simple 4-point compass. Some used 8 points, and some used 12 points, and some used 16 points, and then there were the Arabs with their 32 points of the compass. The problem the Europeans had was trying to adapt the 32-point Arab compass with their system of 360 degrees, because there ended up being 11¼ degrees between the points. Now, some used 16-point rows and that had 400 degrees in it. There's just a few Europeans that did that. I think it's easier to just adapt yourself and use the Arab system of 224 degrees. Don't try to think in 360 degrees. You'll have all kinds of problems. Here is a picture made by Ed Stevens Hagen trying to fit the 32 akhnam onto 360 degrees. And here are the star names of the Arab windrose. Notice how the Arab names were given to each of these different directions. Now, these are not just abstract names. You see, the Arabs didn't think of the circle as just something drawn on the ground. They saw the sky above them as a huge circle divided into these 32 different directions. So when they looked at the horizon, they saw it in terms of being divided into aknam, these different sections, and each of the 32 sections were identified by a star that rose or set at that point on the horizon. The names of the 32 aknam, or the directions, were actually Arab star names. So when you look at the stars, now you and I might just see stars. We might recognize some Greek or Roman constellations. Maybe where we live we can't even see the stars at night. But in the Middle Eastern desert sky, the stars are usually very bright. One of the brightest places I've seen is down in Wadi Rum, but all through the desert there's a lack of humidity, and the stars are very bright because there's nothing competing with them. And since there's no electricity in ancient times, it was dark, usually for 12 hours of the night. And since people only slept for 8 hours, there were usually 2 hours of dark before going to sleep, and another 2 hours of dark when you were getting up. This made it perfect for observing the stars. Now, you can imagine camel caravans stopping for the night after 12 hours of walking. They would use the full 12 hours because it was light and so they could move, they could walk. But once they stopped, they would have 2 hours in the evening to set up camp, to eat, and to visit. Imagine the caravan master taking the young people aside to teach them desert navigation. Those lessons would include memorizing the 32 stars and recognizing them as they rose in the night sky, or they set in the morning. The lessons would include much more than that, as they learned how to calculate their distance and to set their direction for the following day. So the young Nabateans knew the names of the stars, and they could identify them in the night sky. More importantly, they could identify where these stars rose in the evening and where they set in the morning. And they could draw it on the ground accurately, and they could identify it by looking at the stars in the sky. Now here is a time-lapse photo showing the stars rotating in the night sky. And thank you to David Miller for this great photo taken from his website, and I've put the website address below. So the Arabs had 32 star names, but actually there were only 16 names because there was the rising and there was the setting of each star. So each star appears twice in the chart. So memorizing the 16 stars, the 16 star names, and then recognizing them in the sky and where they moved and how they moved was just part of the education of any person working with caravans. So there's only 16 star names to remember. Now, these names were so popular that they became the names for giving directions. Instead of telling someone just go north for a ways, they would tell them to go El-Jah, or go to the north. They could pick up any of the 32 directions and tell someone to go in that direction, and you would know which direction to go. Today, we use confusing terms like south-southwest or something. I think they had a much easier system. Now, as you can see, we are slowly introducing the information that the camel caravan navigators and later the mosque architects had available to them. This has been the second video in this series. In the next video, we're going to learn how the Arab merchants calculated distance. I'm Dan Gibson, and thank you for watching this series about Arab navigation.